give it a second. Alex Buchanan, how you been?
Good, JR. I mean, dude, it's been literal years, man. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I know. Yeah, dude, get up on that mic and introduce yourself to my 17 subscribers.
All 17 of them. I mean, that's the only reason why you have me on. Once you start cresting 100, I mean, I'm going to get, bumped on that priority. So I'm going to get it while I can.
What? No, I want you to be I want you to be a regular guest, man.
Oh, yeah, all day. Well, name's Alex Buchanan. I met you, Jack. You caught me right at the start of my Penn State Army ROTC career. It was my RA, which was huge for me, my development. I'm sure we'll hit that later. After Penn State, went to Army Aviation, went to flight school down in Fort Rucker. Did that for about a year and a half, then headed out to Korea for 2 years, flying CH-47s, and then assessed favorably for the 160th SOAR, and headed down to Fort Campbell for the rest of my career. Got out officially in 2022, and since then I've been running my own vacation rental business with my best friend from flight school. Got married, 2 kids, a 9-year-old daughter and a 18-month-old son, and just living out in the mountains of Pennsylvania now. So loving it.
That sounds amazing. And, everyone I meet from the 160th just kind of glosses over the fact that they're in the 160th. So I'm going to brag on you. But for those that are not in the military sphere, the 160th is the premier rotary wing unit headquartered in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And they are essentially, when our SOF units, our Special Operations Forces, need air assets, specifically rotary wing assets, that's their mode of transportation. That's how they get around. That's how they have, direct action support on, when they're on objective. And I wanted to, give a quick shout out to, where we met, the Penn State Nittany Lion Battalion. Go Penn State, we are. But
Penn State.
look at this little sizzle reel they got. I don't know if you can see this, but look at this little sizzle reel they have now.
Look wow.
Nittany Lion,
dude.
They've come a long way since we were there, right?
Oh, 100%. Look at that website. It used to be super clunky. Yeah, motivation. I'm ready to re-sign back up. Let's go be cadets again. I'm ready to go.
About a year ago, I had an opportunity to talk to some cadets. These were West Point cadets, not ROTC cadets. But, I told them, a lot of them had an interest in, branching infantry when their time was up as cadets. And I said, if I could go back and do it all over again, I would. I don't know. I always wanted to join the military from a young age, and I'm curious in a second to hear about your journey to why you ended up joining the Army. But you meet like lifelong friends through the Army that you wouldn't otherwise. I mean, people from all walks of life, all parts of the country, all socioeconomic statuses, all backgrounds, and you all get mixed together. You put on the same uniform, and you bleed and sweat together, which is that's a pretty special American experience from my perspective.
Oh, 100%. I mean, put it to us. I hadn't talked to you in 10 years at least, and just linked up while you were at Quad A down in Nashville, and picked up the phone and talked like I'd talked to you the day before graduating Penn State. I mean, it was incredible, and I've not been able to reproduce that outside of anyone I've met, outside of the Army or the armed services at all. So it's so special and something that I hold very dear to my heart on. So for sure. For me, like getting into service, I think I was in high school wrestling, kind of this no real direction. I wasn't that great of a wrestler, so it wasn't like I had wrestling to lean on. Pennsylvania is pretty competitive, and I was average at best. And one day, Boy Scout Jamboree up at West Point, my sophomore and junior year, and I said, wow, this looks cool. Everyone running around with their friends, playing with guns, running around in the woods. Like, I like running around in the woods. Let's check it out. So that was really the first time I had a goal. I'd say like a true goal and direction, or something that I really bit into and said, I'm going to do this. Continued on and ended up, through a bunch of extra detail at Penn State doing Army ROTC, which was excellent. And one of my first days, the first guy I see walking in as I'm walking in my dorm room for college is none other than Jackie Ryan.
That's crazy to think about. Yeah, I remember the day I met you. I think it was August or September 2009,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. My memory serves me. Yeah, and you always had a swagger about you, and you had some natural leadership, abilities. I definitely gravitated towards you. Oh, I think we gravitated towards each other. We were like-minded that way, and I think you and I both see the world. And correct me if I'm wrong. We both see the world through an optic of, this world experience is not happening to us. Like, we are in the driver's seat, and you can control your life experience. You can control the people that surround you. You can control their behaviors to a certain degree in a positive way. And that's I'm sure that's why you went the opposite route, and you were a leader in the Army and in aviation. But I think you and I don't just let life happen to us.
No, we go take it. I think you're absolutely right. We gravitated towards each other. I mean, from the first day, the energy of you're trying to get the whole floor to be together. And like, I bit right into that. Like, I wanted, 10th floor brum ball, right? We were the crew. We were brum balling, right? Like, we were just out there crushing it. And I loved it. It was something that for me going into a new environment, and it immediately helped me break through that initial uncomfort in a new environment, feel immediately comfortable, and many other stories of you helping me push through situations where I may have been taking myself too seriously, not relaxing enough, or not working hard enough, and always challenging me, as a future leader. And, we never talked about it too much, but that's been pivotal in my leadership development. It's something that's been huge, which led me to eventually be an RA from my experience with you. So,
yeah, and for those that might be listening abroad and don't know what an RA stands for, it's a common terminology here in the U.S. for resident assistant, which is someone that's usually an upperclassman, like a junior or senior in college, that oversees and helps manage a dorm room floor, typically, or part of a floor, depending on how large the floor is. But yeah, no. So you grew up in Pennsylvania, so Penn State was like an obvious choice. Like, if you wanted to go to a premier college that's in-state. I mean, and also the ROTC program. Did you know much about the ROTC program at Penn State before you got connected with them?
So I initially was down, and I hate to say this for any other Army vets listening, I was fully set on the Naval Academy to start out, and I wanted to do their Navy SEAL training pipeline, which there's a lot of people that wanted to do certain things, but Naval Academy, West Point didn't work out for me. And as I was applying for the service academies, I got some good advice on the front side of all of my applications to also in parallel apply for an ROTC scholarship, because it was another fully funded way to become a military officer. So I applied to Rutgers, come from a big Rutgers family, so that was really the first. And then Penn State I heard about and saw a lot about. Even the website, 10 years ago or 15 years ago now, was big enough to attract my attention, and I wanted to go see it, did a visit out at Penn State Army ROTC, and I was taken aback by just the community and the kind of training you got to do. It was awesome.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I felt very fortunate to I guess commission through that ROTC program, and what I failed to realize initially, and now I fully recognize, is that Penn State had an enormous ROTC program compared to most, non-Corps of Cadet colleges, and aside from the military academies, so you take those out of the equation, I think Penn State is or was the largest as far as the number of commissioned, military officers that graduate and commission every year. I mean, I think it was, well, at least I don't think it's probably at this number anymore, but it was at least like, maybe 55 Army guys, probably 30 or 40 Air Force every year, 50 Navy ROTC options, with a mix of Marines and people just going to the Navy. And I, like you, I applied for a Navy and an Army ROTC scholarship, and I think I ended up going with the Army just because they had more MOS options, more job options, like a variety of options, and I'm glad I did. And you meet a lot of cool people in the Army, but when you were, so you did fine at ROTC, you graduated, and you branched aviation. And for those people that don't know, when you're about to commission, either through a service academy like West Point or the Naval Academy like Alex mentioned, or through ROTC like we did, you pick your branch. You kind of give the Army or the Navy, for that matter, your wish list, and then based on how well you did in the ROTC program and in academics and your physical fitness tests, that determines which jobs you are essentially eligible for. Can you tell me about your decision process? When you were picking your branch and you were deciding your own fate of how your Army career would look like, at least for the next 4 years. Can you tell me a little bit about what weighed into that decision process?
Oh, absolutely. So I ran around. You knew all my close friends in ROTC pretty well. Still know them pretty well. And I was infantry. I did the Ranger Challenge Club. I was like, I want to be infantry. That was the premier example of leadership. Taking men and leading them into battle. And combat was the the mecca, right? And I wanted that for so long until I got to our leadership development assessment camp, or LDAC, junior year, and someone asked about flight physicals. And to be honest, I said, that's a day I don't have to be doing something I don't want to do. So I said, I want to go aviation. Yeah. Let me get my flight physical.
That's funny. That's pretty funny. Okay. Tell me more about this.
So I'm serious. I was sitting we just cleaned the barracks, and they were talking about weapons cleanings and all these other things. They're like, all right, who's interested in aviation? And I said, I'm not doing this dumb stuff anymore. I can't do mindless tasks. So I said, I'm going to go think about aviation. I started talking to some other cadets that have been wanting to do aviation their entire career, similar to how I wanted to do infantry. I had my whole infantry plan from talking to other lieutenants, NCOs, everyone, but they had the same kind of plan, but just on the aviation side. And talking to them all day, knowingly going to fail my eye exam. And I got through it all and actually started to get very excited about aviation, to the point at LDAC, there's a branch day where you get to go see all the different jobs that you can get out of the Army. I went and talked to the aviators, and I walked around a helicopter, which I hadn't. I'm not from a military family or background, so this is all new. This is all something I was diving into, where outside of grandparents, great uncles, it's all foreign to me. And I get back, and now I'm torn, because now I have to go get eye surgery. Able to do that. Very fortunate to be able to do that. And because I did 4.5 years, I had the opportunity to redo a flight physical and branch a year later. So I started getting torn. And actually a mutual mentor of ours, David Rizzo, gave me some advice. And I was between aviation, I was between Army, and I was just so torn. Between infantry and aviation, and I was completely torn. And Dave came up to me one day and said, hey, look, if you are between infantry and something else, do something else.
Good advice.
He's like, I know you do well. I know you'd be in it. But infantry is a branch that is so hard and maybe 1% of the time fun, that if it is not the only thing in your sights, you're going to be miserable and you're not going to be the best officer you can be. And that advice kind of helped click it all together for me. And next day I put in my branch order of aviation, infantry, and then armor. And luckily enough, very fortunate to get aviation. So kind of went from dodging work I didn't feel like doing to branching it, and so happy I did.
Yeah. No, I am too. I've enjoyed watching your journey from afar and hearing about your experience as an Army aviator. I think it's a really special career path. And for those that are not aware of just the rigor involved in what Alex has gone through, really in any branch of the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, being a pilot is obviously pretty sought after. There's more people that want to be pilots than there are aircraft that they can fly in. So, every military branch is fairly selective on who they pick. Not only because there's not enough slots, the demand outweighs the supply, but because of the level of rigor, mental fortitude, physical fortitude. You have to pass a pretty strict physical. You have to have good eyesight. There's so much involved, and there's the cost of training a military pilot is, well, really any pilot, but especially a military pilot, is astronomical, which typically incurs an additional service obligation. So, like for me, I did 4 years active as an infantry officer, and then was able to transition to the reserves or get out. Alex, since they put so much time, effort, and resources into training you how to fly a Chinook, CH-47, MH-47, they wanted to hold on to you for a few more years. Is that accurate, I'd say?
Oh, 100% accurate. So my initial service obligation was 6 years, but not 6 years from commissioning, 6 years from completing your initial entry rotary wing training. So really 7.5 years was my initial commitment. Then to get going through 160th to get the MH-47 qualification, there was another, and forgive me, it was 2 to 4 years of service, but you could serve it at the same time. It wasn't additive; it was concurrent with any other ADSO, which is why I was able to get out at about 8.5 years. But there was additional service to even get another aircraft qualification, and that works if you end up going fixed wing or special operations. Any new airframe the Army sends to train you in, it's typically you're gonna owe Uncle Sam another couple years.
Yeah, totally. I don't think I fully recognize that, but it makes a lot of sense that if they're going to train you in another airframe, of course they're going to you're going to incur an additional service obligation to make sure that you stick around. And I know when I was deployed in Afghanistan, reading the Early Bird, which is like a collection of open source news articles that the Army and the military puts together for service members and contractors to read. I still read it occasionally. One of the articles that came up on my feed was like the Air Force had a really difficult time retaining pilots at that 10 to 15 year mark, because for those that don't know and haven't worked in the aviation industry, I've only worked in the commercial aviation industry, but Alex has obviously flown military aircraft. But there's a huge shortage of pilots right now, not just pilots, technicians, A&P mechanics, other ancillary job functions within aviation across the board. And so the Air Force was offering I think $250,000 bonuses for Air Force pilots, especially fighter pilots, to stay in that had unique skill sets and experiences. It wasn't a lump sum of $250,000. I think it was over the period of 5 or 10 years. But that's becoming a real issue, that a lot of the skilled pilots that do well, like yourself, the military is having a hard time retaining them. I mean, did you see that during your time as a military aviator?
Absolutely. It's weird to see a competition between the armed services and the private sector, like true competition, where I just saw recently United launched a pipeline program for pilots wanting to transition from the Army or other service branches into a first officer role. And you do it in the last 6 months of your service, get qualified on the aircraft, and you get an interview and get hired direct versus having to grind and build your way up. They are truly, because of not only the shortage on military aviation, but even on commercial aviation with all the big waves of retirement, right, of the boomer generation. So now it's a true competition to maintain aviation talent. I feel like that's it's not just the Army. It's everyone is fighting for who's willing to go out and fly day in and day out.
No, I'm with you. And I just recently reconnected with my RTO in theater when I was a platoon leader, and he made the transition from infantryman, 11 Bravo, and now he's a warrant officer flying Chinooks. So I'm actually... Oh,
nice.
Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah, he just graduated his Chinook training. Of course, he crushed it. There's no doubt in my mind this guy has a mentality for the smarts, obviously the radio procedures. He's really good at that. So I'm always curious to talk to people, and I think he's going to get on the podcast. His name's Matt. But I'm curious to hear his perspective since he's so fresh out of flight school. What it's like, going from the infantry life, that 11 Bravo life, to a warrant officer. I don't know what the MOS is. I don't even know what his MOS is now.
I think it's a 150. He's either a 153 or a 154, if I remember correctly, is the MOS for Chinook pilot. And then if he ends up going 160th or Special Operations, is addition like Kilo 4, Kilo 6 qualifiers that will get added, and he'll actually end up more than maybe you care to know, but still he'll end up competing with just 160th warrants and pilots for certain promotions and things like that. So it's a whole different dynamic in the warrant officer side, where I'm traveling around regardless, PCSing, but the warrant officers, there's guys that have been at Fort Campbell for 15 years just flying and being mission pilots. So it's great.
Cool. Yeah, that's a cool job function in general. I think the Chinook holds a pretty special place in my heart. I've only ridden on the CH-47 and then the civilian, Columbia operated equivalent. It's a contractor that operated retrofitted, Chinooks in theater in Afghanistan, mainly in RC South, but I think they operated in RC East too. I haven't had the pleasure to fly in an MH-47, but I've been in one a few times, and the technology that's embedded in our nation's rotary wing assets is like truly incredible. So I'm eager to hear his perspective. Fresh out of flight school, brand new, going from a ground, leader in a infantry unit to, flying and supporting those guys. I've met a few people in my career who have made the transition to either infantryman or SOF operator to pilot. And it seems to be a pretty good transition for them. I've met people that have gone from, a Green Beret to an MH40, an MH46? No, MH60, sorry. So they went from Green Beret to MH60. I've met guys that went from infantrymen to Cobras. This is, their career was a while back. That was a while back. And I've met people that have done, infantry to flying Chinooks. And I think they have a greater appreciation for just how critical those air assets are to the guys on the ground. I know for me, when you have an Apache overhead, or even a Kiowa when those were still, deploying, having a rotary wing asset flying above you is just like the best feeling ever as a, as the ground force commander. Like as the guy on the ground in a tactical situation, it's like incredible to have air assets, even if you can't stay that long because you run out of fuel. So
yeah, no, it's true. I mean, some of the best mentorship I got as a young platoon leader in the 160th was from guys who are former Green Berets, former Rangers, because they truly internalized the appreciation and like what we were there to do and our role in the battle space. And I just learned an incredible amount. And you're absolutely right. Like they know, because they've been the one on the hilltop with a Chinook landing one wheel pinnacle as they're getting shot at, trying to get off a hill in Afghanistan. Plenty of stories like that. So you're absolutely right. And I've learned some of the most from some of the flight leads, or the in the 160th, the flight lead is the truly the one in charge of an air mission for the tactical plan and ensuring that our assets get from point A to point B with the ground force and the ground force commander to meet his intent, while as the commissioned officer is focused on risk mitigation and other battle space coordination as the air mission commander. So these flight leads are 10 to 15 years minimum experience in Army Aviation with thousands of hours, and they're the best pilots I ever worked with, and it was a privilege to learn from them. And a lot of them that spent the initial 10 years of their career on the ground before going and leading in the regiment.
Oh hell yeah, dude! That's awesome. That gives me chills to think about guys that they have an appreciation, like you said. They know what it's like to be in the ground, 100-pound rucksack, plate carrier on, loaded down with ammunition, radio batteries, maybe a couple Cliff Bars and water. Yeah, that totally resonates what you just said, and I think those guys have a different perspective. And I was listening to a podcast earlier today to try to get in my headspace. It was a couple of West Point graduates talking about their time serving in Apache units, serving as air mission commanders in theater in Iraq and Afghanistan. And just the amount of responsibility, not only for the airframes, the crew members. As an air mission commander, it's insane the amount of responsibility you have, because not only do you have your crew and everyone that is flying and operating the aircraft, but you have all the guys that are in the back too, and you have to think about them. And when this guy was a battalion commander, it was very clear that absolutely no one was getting left behind on the objective. And I think you can probably speak to that from a more of a direct experience, but getting an accurate head count, making sure you have every single person accounted for, even if they're a casualty and you got to unfortunately evacuate them in haste. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, leaving no man behind.
Absolutely. So what's interesting about the 160th is it's very heavily leaned on the flight lead to make the tactical plan and ensure in the lead aircraft and all aircraft behind it that we get from point A to point B to the objective and back with everything that we need. And as an air mission commander, where in the regular Army, it may be you have a little more responsibility. You may be making more tactical in-flight decisions. As air mission commander in the regiments, ensuring that you help go and fight for the assets and assist the flight lead in getting the assets that they need. You ensure that headcount. You are backing them up on all this risk mitigation and all these other measures while they're focusing on, hey, I'm getting me and my other aircraft with the men on board to where we need to go. Your job is to not only know that plan inside and out so you don't get in the way, you help enable them to do the mission better, but also you're coordinating with all the other assets, which, we'll call in the stack. So at different flight levels or different altitudes, different, assets that are supporting the mission, flying in the air, are all talking on the radio constantly at the same time. And you're there to help mitigate risk and identify big risk points to the command, from that plan and help get that plan approved for the ground force commander.
Oh, that's cool, man. Yeah, we obviously collaborated a lot with the cab that was at Fort Bliss when I was an infantry guy there, and even just training missions, doing an air assault at night under nods. There was so much coordination involved. I was blown away, talking to their lieutenant colonel, and just the meticulous way they went about planning every single detail. Because if something goes slightly off the plan, and you're doing a ground mission, you usually have enough fuel and resources to pause, hang out, and kind of reevaluate and adjust based on the situation. But when you're flying in the air, burning, I don't even know how many thousands of pounds of Jet A per hour, probably a lot with a Chinook, you don't have that luxury. Everything has to match up, especially when you're dealing with soft forces. Everything has to match up perfectly to give them the best chance of success. And that's whether that be, okay, you're going to send one crew out, they're going to provide coverage for a certain amount of time. Maybe you have a DAP, maybe you have another asset, a drone. Those all have to overlap in a way that suits the ground force commander and make sure those guys have good coverage. And that's not easy to do. That's a lot harder than I realized until I got more in depth with the planning and the logistics behind some of these air assaults.
Oh, absolutely. So and that comes, this kind of sparked, right? You're coordinating all these assets to be on time. And, what the flight lead's telling you is, and hey, I need X, Y, and Z at these times. Go make sure this can happen for me, right? And I think the 160th does an excellent job of training flight leads to be mentors, really, for captains as air mission commanders. Because you could be a pilot in command in the regular Army, an air mission commander, and you come back as just a regular pilot in the 160th, and you have to build yourself up again, learn the tactics, techniques, and different procedures, because it is that much more complicated and you have that much more going on at a given time. And I could say, like, one of the biggest lessons I've learned is thinking about second, third order effects instantly from being in that organization, down to what we call like the go around plan. So it's something as simple, and I know in the regular Army I glossed over it. All right, we're three of us, we're landing at this point, go-arounds are to the right. And that's it. Where you just get eviscerated if you try to brief a go-around plan in the 160th that way, where, well, what if Chalk 1 just does a go-around and the other two can land? What if Chalk 2 can't land and the rest land? Like, where are we going to go? Where's the dust? Where are the mountains? When I was assessing for the regiment, flying with a great flight lead and another flight lead, which if he watches this, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. No sleep, briefing my plan, because you do some tactical planning and executing there. Not to say too much, but I briefed, hey, go-arounds are to the right on the objective. Flight lead's like, why to the right? I'm like, I don't know, because I'm tired and they're going to the right. Because I was tired. I was just like, I need to get this plan briefed, and we just need to go. Like, let's just go. He's like, all right, we'll talk about it when we get there. So find my target, The 160th, I don't know if you know, has a time standard, which talk about all the complications. On top of everything else you're coordinating, you need to hit your target plus or minus 30 seconds.
Oh,
so
that's plus or minus 30 seconds?
100%. That is...
Wow. Okay, that's really precise.
100%.
Especially for a rotary wing asset. Yeah, that's really, really precise.
Oh yeah, it's anywhere in the world plus or minus 30 seconds, right? That's the mantra. And I was 3 minutes late. I wasn't in the regiment yet. I'm just trying out, and we land and we stop, and the guy I was flying with, instructor, pilot, flight lead, huge amount of experience. I mean, it was flying with a legend. And he looks over at me and says, "Why don't you look to your right?" I look to my right with my goggles on. I look up at the huge mountain to the right of the objective. He's like, "Do you see why now you want to do go arounds to the right?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Do you even know how to read a map?" And I said,
Humbling.
"Obviously not."
Humbling, dude. That's humbling.
Oh yeah, because you planned the whole mission with no imagery or anything. You're planning just off a jog, and that's it. And it just kind of, I thought I had my plan, all my points picked out, and I could have killed everyone if I stuck with go arounds to the right, because they changed it. Said, "No, we're going to go to the left over the river." And I said, "Okay, cool." But it's just one of many points in that unit that I've learned so much and indebted so much of my leadership and the people that I worked with to give me the grace to grow and learn and figure it all out. And I can name and rattle off so many people that truly helped me through that, because not only as you saw as a young man at Penn State, I'm not I can be hard-headed, and I like to extend myself sometimes and overextend myself when it comes to trying new things. So having a good leadership to help guide me and allow me to stumble in a safe way was critical.
Yeah, I always felt like you were very teachable, though. I do think I understand what you're saying by hard-headed. I totally get it, and I think to a certain degree that's true. I think it's more just you're determined to achieve your goal, which is not just that's not a bad thing. But one of the things I noticed about you right away is that you were very receptive to feedback, which I think probably helped you immensely in the 160th, and probably even before that. If you back up, when you were first arriving at Fort Ruckers, I don't know what it's called now, but when you went to Fort Ruckers, or Fort Rucker, right? What was it like when you first put your hands on the collective and the cyclic, and you first got in the cockpit and were actually controlling an aircraft in real life, not just in a sim? What was going through your head? How did it make you feel?
Oh, it was, there's 1,000 quotes about the first time flying. Like, once you've looked up or once you've tasted flight, you never stop looking up. And I know you know that from your flight experience, right? Like, it's just it's just so cool.
It's amazing.
Now, I'll be honest, it was really cool flying, but then, because what they do is you got a guy that has 10,000 hours in a helicopter, civilian contractor, teaching you how to fly this. It's no longer, it was a Bell 206 when I went through, like a news helicopter for those that aren't familiar. And now it's a Lakota. I think it's like the UH-72 that they teach. But flying with this, essentially a British Air Force or British Army guy that 10,000 hours in helicopters, and we're flying along, we're straight and level in the air, and then he lets me take control and do some kind of S-turns, up-downs, and that was all great. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I love this. I'm so glad I did this. And then we go and land at our training field. And something, if you want to talk about humbling, is the first time they try to get you to hover an aircraft. Hover a helicopter. It is, you can look up videos of, they call it the salad bowl. But he pretty much let go of the flight controls, and I was on it for the first time. And there's like a millisecond, I'm like, this is awesome, I'm doing it. And then all of a sudden the aircraft was just going all over the place. Instructors just hanging out, and I am just trying not to crash into the ground, and I could feel him putting little inputs so I didn't crash us, but it was in a it was a lot. But that's it. That's her right there. Single engine, little beautiful thing.
Yeah, the Jet Ranger is awesome. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Bell Helicopter. They make amazing machines. I guess this is the Italian variant. I don't know if they're still using it. Well, this is closer to, when you went to flight school, probably a little bit before. But yeah, so it's essentially a modified civilian airframe. Is that correct? Pretty much.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Turbine
literally
powered.
100% single turbine engine. It's like a semi. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. Like it's a semi-floating rotor system, so it's kind of weird. It's on like this little hinge, and you have this like spike that sits in a hole in the engine, and it kind of like floats. So like down in that cowling there, there's a little spike, and there's one thing I still have memorized from all the stuff you have to memorize is spike knock. And if you just land too hard, like the rotor system like knocks into the engine. They have to inspect that, make sure you didn't crack anything. But yeah. So talk about the flying stuff. There was just, I was not naturally gifted in control touch in flying, so I focused all my energy on memorizing everything I could about the aircraft. So I knew that inside and out. So whenever the control touch came, it did, which is why I still remember the definition of spike knock and what you have to do when it occurs. But it's a great aircraft.
It is. Oh, it's incredible. I love these things. I think a lot of them have like glass cockpits now, which reduces a lot of the weight and a lot of the pilot workload too. But yeah, a lot of civilian aircraft have that weakness. A lot of civilian rotorcraft, I should say, rotary air wings. A lot of civilian helicopters have that weakness right there. And if you put too much stress on that area, you have to take the whole thing apart, and they have to do inspection and, I don't know, probably non-destructive inspection, non-destructive test. But that's cool. I didn't realize that was the first aircraft you flew. The Lakota's a cool aircraft too. I dig the Lakota. It's different.
Oh,
it's different.
is.
Yeah, I saw those kind of resurfaced in some National Guard units. I don't know if they're still using them, but I remember the first time I flew by myself, because in the civilian side you have to solo if you're getting a single engine land license.
Yeah, tell me about that, man.
So I mean, you essentially, I had like 12 or 13 hours in a Cessna 150 or Cessna 172. I did kind of a combination of both, usually the 172. And then, your first test, your first solo, you don't go very far from the airfield. You basically just stay in the pattern. And for my non-aviator folk out there, which pretty much means you take off from the runway and you just do like a square, like literally a rectangle around the airfield, and you just land back on the runway. So you basically just do one loop. I did one loop or two loops with the instructor, pulled into the taxiway. The engine was still running. He's like, yep, hit the brakes. He hopped out, grabbed a radio and said, good luck, go do it. And so like literally at 12 hours, or 13 hours, I was flying this little Cessna by myself, and it was like both terrifying. It was both terrifying, but also the most liberating experience ever. Because like you're looking down, 1,000 feet above ground, and you're like, man, this is so cool. I'm just holding the yoke, and I mean, the aircraft's probably way easier because you can just set the wing levelers, and you can basically fly it with your thumb and your forefinger, as long as the throttle is dialed in, the mixture is dialed in. It's super easy to fly. But that first landing by yourself, you want to grease that first landing and set yourself up. So, yeah.
Don't want to look like a fool.
You don't want to embarrass yourself, man. But luckily, those Cessnas are really, those Cessnas are very forgiving. And I flew that one too, not in the water.
Really?
I didn't fly it in the water, but I flew it with wheels. That's a turbine-powered aircraft. It's a Cessna Caravan. It's got a PT6 turbine, turboprop engine. And that's a really cool aircraft too. And like, believe it or not, it's a non-pressurized single engine plane. So I was able to fly that for a short period of time.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
It's an awesome machine. So now they're putting all sorts of, payloads on that thing. It's amazing to see. It's a beast. It's a workhorse. So like once you had some time in that Jet Ranger, let's call it, I don't know what the military nomenclature was. You got comfortable flying, you got some proficiency at some amount of hours. Was there a period of time, did you have to go to any other intermediate aircraft before going to the Chinook?
Oh, absolutely. So
Okay.
they start with the Bell 206, and I think they called Jet Ranger. There's some other terms I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you do visual flight first. So yes, you're looking at your instruments, but it's what they call VMC, visual meteorological conditions. So you're
Hmm.
not flying in the clouds, this, and focusing on hovering. For example, talk about humbling experiences. You get about 13 flight hours. Excuse me. You get about 13 flight hours to be able to hover unassisted.
Okay.
It took me about 12 and a half hours to hit it.
Yeah, that's okay. Hey.
Yeah, it's fine. It works out, right? Like I'm here, right? That my flight certificate doesn't say couldn't hover worth a damn for 12 and a half hours. Um, so, and you're learning how to hold an airspeed, this hold an altitude, and just really control the aircraft. Once you master that, then you go to instrument flight rules and IMC flying in the same Bell 206, just with the IMC kit on it. So more instrumentation, the nav, GPS, and all those items. And you do a bunch of approaches with, I was lucky enough that my instructor pilot was from Vietnam, and he didn't believe in something called force trim, which is
Wow.
just a this just like a set of springs that help hold the controls where they need to be for a long period of time. So it's not a lot of, it kind of eases the pilot workload on holding your airspeed, your altitude, your trim. But he didn't believe in it, so I was flying with just loose controls, and it ended up being good because I was someone that lacked control touch, and it was hard for me. So it ended up working out in the end. And to finally answer your question, because I just like to take it around the block, I was very fortunate to fly a Kiowa. For what they call basic warfighter skills. So that's when we first learned how to navigate from point A to point B with just a stopwatch, a heading, and a paper map, and trying to find targets to go land at. So that was the next intermediate aircraft I flew before the Chinook.
Yeah, I had a similar like training path. I had about most people try to solo a fixed wing airplane at like that 12 to 15 hour mark if you're on track and if you're flying regularly. So I did that, and then yeah, like the next step was to be able to navigate with just literally a timer, your heading, you're on your compass, and so this is the Kiowa that Alex is talking about. But yeah, that's kind of the next step to see like, hey, can you find your way around using a map? The map says there's a river, 20 kilometers or 20 nautical miles ahead of you. Are you able to identify landmarks from the cockpit that you see on the map? And are you
Yep.
are you where you're supposed to be in time and space? And so that totally resonates what you're saying. I'm kind of jealous you got to fly one of these. These things can do some pretty cool maneuvers just due to their size.
Oh, 100%. I was so fortunate, and I flew with a guy, who flew Kiowas for 15 years, 20 years. So what he was able to show me in that aircraft, and let's just say that we were doing well, so there were some days on our way out to our first target that we got to take a couple detours, and he got to show us some of the maneuverability of the Kiowa. And I know for you as an infantryman, and other infantrymen I talked to, is that it was like your best friend, in theater, willing to come hover right over top and say, "Who you want us to shoot? Where are we going? Like, let's do it, brother. We're ready to go." Those guys are cowboys, cowboys.
Yeah, they are, man. That was my experience. I mean, they fly so low. I mean, these things would literally. I mean, I don't know exactly how high off they were off the ground, but they were literally like they felt like they were skimming the rooftops in Arctic
Yeah.
South, and like I could almost reach up and like give them a high five. Like if I stood on top of a striker, I could give them a high five. But yeah, I've got a lot of videos of these things flying around us and stuff, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's cool to think about like the coordination between like the ground and air assets. One of the things that was really valuable in my infantry training pipeline, this was more like an on-the-job training thing at Fort Bliss, was my company commander invited an Army Apache pilot. I think he was a captain at the time. He might have been about to be up for major, so a pretty seasoned Apache pilot. And we were trying to work that CCA language, right? Like this is how you talk to a helicopter, because that wasn't really, we kind of learned that at IBOLC during our basic, infantry training at Fort Benning, Georgia. But, this was a guy that had been deployed like 3 times already in theater. He'd probably supported, I don't know, hundreds of PLs on the ground and, hundreds of ground units. And so he basically gave us a crash course on how to effectively communicate. Infantrymen talking on radio, RF signal going to you up in the sky, flying around, and how do you keep it brief? Because aviators don't like to clog up the net, like you're not supposed to. And then how do you, accurately relay your position so there's no friendly fire? That's really important. That's probably like the main thing you want to start with. Hey, here's my frontline trace. I have guys out here. Okay, this is where we're at. Yeah. And you want to give them an accurate grid, or if you have an IR strobe or some sort of other marking device, you want to let them know of that, especially if it's at night. And then you tell them what to do. So I would give them instructions, and then I would hand them off to my JTAC, and we rock and roll. Because I wouldn't want to be fixated. Like I couldn't be fixated on the aircraft, right? I had to give them instructions, give them like what I would like them to do, where we're heading, and then I hand off like the back and forth to my FO, who was a JTAC trained FO. He was awesome.
I mean, you're, as the ground force commander, you are commanding the battle space, right? Everything is surrounded around you, and knowing at least that it's interesting that it's basically you have to give your intent to everyone, so you know what everyone's operating off of, and then allow your team to coordinate it and make it happen for you. When it comes to the radio stuff, it was the amount of training I got with the 160th of even as calling out other aircraft in the sky, right? Mm-hmm. I'd come in, I'd say, hey, I see an aircraft at 2:00 above the horizon, and some of the instructors I flew with in the training pipeline were like, let's shorten that. Yep. Aircraft 2:00, 2 fingers above the horizon, going right to left.
Yep.
Like immediately you can dial into that, right? Versus just this ramble on of words trying to get someone to talk on, right? So it's the same thing with directing someone. And I'm sure you saw that with your CCA training, right? All right, hill, 12:00. To the right, 2 clicks, valley. Down there, your line of fire is X to Y. Here, it's like just using quick and the closest landmarks to help dial someone in, so you two are seeing the same sight picture, and then being able to talk off of that. And that is something that took a lot of training for me, because I also like to be verbose.
Yeah, you've been known to do that.
I've been known to be a little verbose, and I do like learning and training. So I'd say the guys I worked with, and just very fortunate to have the guys that are willing to train me. Willing to put the time in to help me out. But yeah, it's a whole different world, and my wife gets on me sometimes because I'm like directing her and driving. I'm like, see the bridge, 12:00, make a right. As you go into the overpass, you'll see a stop sign to your left, and she's like, stop being so weird and just put in the GPS, dude.
I have the same problem. I've had to back off because it would annoy the crap out of my wife, because I would do the same thing. I would be like just super direct, brief instructions, this is what we're doing. And people really don't like to be talked to that way. that was more out of necessity from what you and I did. So I haven't told many people this, but the hardest thing I had trouble, breaking this habit. I struggled with this because when I was going from, operating an ASIP or, 117 Fox or Golf or, whatever Harris radio, it's, hey, this is chosen 1-6, over. You say that, you say over, and that's like the end of the transmission. And I was in the civilian aircraft, talking to ATC and talking to the air traffic controllers on the ground. And I would say, this is, whatever tail number. This is 331, November 331 JR, Juliet Romeo, over. And my instructor would be like, stop saying over. You don't need to say your tail number and that's it. So in civilian aviation, you end with your tail number, and that's confirming so they know who the heck just said that, and they can match it up to an aircraft. You don't say any unnecessary words in civilian aviation over the radio. Like it's wrong. It's taboo. If your flight instructor doesn't catch you and correct you, ATC could potentially say like, hey, they might call you up on your cell phone afterwards. Mm-hmm. Like, yo, like you cannot clog the net like that. Like you have to leave the net open. And I had such a hard time breaking that habit. You know.
Oh, it's funny.
Yeah. Like, I would say over, and like, you do not say over in civilian aviation. So.
Yeah, I noticed that with working with the ground force, over, out, all that. But it's same thing in Army Aviation, right? Because we're still talking to ATC. We end with like Army 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it. And it is the brevity, especially with civilian aviation, is just not to be messed with, because you're flying through airspace where it's not just this little helicopter chugging along at 110 knots, just like happy to be there. Like, I'm just happy to be there, moving along.
Moving at the speed of smell.
yeah. And like, I've flown up, Broadway in Nashville, which has been a lot of fun, like just flying through downtown. But there's also like 30 airliners flying at, anywhere from 270 to 400 knots. And they're like, stop talking, get out of the way. Stay below this altitude. Do not talk on the radio. Like, just get out of the airspace as fast as possible.
Yeah, because they might be controlling. I don't know how many aircraft one air traffic controller can be talking to, but it's not. I mean, sometimes they're controlling like half a dozen or a dozen aircraft. So they're going from like one to the next.
It's a lot. Oh yeah, they're cooking. They're cooking, dude. They're not messing around.
Wild to think about. So let me review the progression. 206 Jet Ranger, Kiowa, then CH-47?
That's correct.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Yeah.
That's 3 out of the 4 helicopters that I know you've flown before. Okay, so tell me about the first time you flew the Chinook. The Chinook has a really special place in my heart. That is a really unique airframe that is just, it's so central to the DoD rotary wing assets, and they just can't get rid of it because it's so good. It's so well designed. It's so powerful. It's so fast. The gross weight that it can take off with is like it almost defies the laws of physics, and it's a pretty reliable airframe for what I understand.
It is. You're absolutely right, and it's the design. Overall design has not changed much since the Alpha model. And so for me, it's like even the aircraft selection. So I don't know how much you know about this, Jack. It's like you could go through all of flight school, right? So we get flight tests on the Jet Ranger, on the Kiowa, knowledge tests, PT tests, like any other Army school. And then you get ranked on an order of merit list, and that's the order in which you get to pick your airframe.
Yep.
But I've had buddies that walked into aircraft selection and they said, all right, everyone stand up, you're all Apache pilots.
Oh my gosh, that'd be like a great day for a lot of people, I bet.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been days everyone stood up, you're all Black Hawk pilots, right? So there's no selection. I was very fortunate that in my class for the commissioned officers, we had 1 Apache, 1 Chinook, and the rest were Black Hawks. I was number 3 of the commissioned officers in my class, and one of my good buddies was number 1. He wanted Apache, so I knew I was safe. And very fortunate and very lucky for me, the number 2 guy really wanted to be a Black Hawk pilot. So then it finally came to me, and I was able to select Chinooks.
Oh, cool. Okay. So, yeah, so I was going to ask you that too, about the OML and how that worked. So you wanted Chinooks. Like, that was the airframe you had your eye on. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay.
So it was interesting. So I always had, was a planner. Initially, my buddy and I, who I went through the Kiowa training pipeline with, were like, hey, we're both going to be Apache pilots, and we want to go fly Little Birds in the 160th. So I have through my life, I had a plan, and then, unbeknownst to me, the plan changed. Like, infantry, I'm going to do a flight physical. I'm going Apaches. There's only 1 Apache, and my buddy that wants Apaches is picking it. So that's the change of plan. But Chinook was my second because of how versatile they are, right? The mission set was so diverse, how much weight they can carry in fuel, people, ammo, supplies, and you had a humanitarian side. You had direct action. It was just so awesome to see. And was able to select Chinooks. I still have the shot glass I bought from whatever the study material store outside of Fort Rucker you can get that I bought when I picked Chinooks because, damn it, I'm going to have a shot glass.
It's such a cool airframe, and, it's evolved over the years, similar to, the C-17, the C-130. I would say even the A-10 kind of falls in this category. It's just a workhorse in its category, and I'm not sure. When they go to look at a new design, I know there are tilt rotors too that the military has fielded, but the rigor that goes into building these Chinooks cannot be understated. For those who have never been up close and personal with either a CH-47 or an MH-47, which is the Special Operations version, it's incredible. I think the scale of it when you first see one is how does this thing get off the ground? It's enormous. I mean, it's enormous. It looks almost like a boat. It looks like it should be in the water.
Oh yeah, and that's why you have a whole crew. I mean, when you're flying this thing, you're in an airplane, you got the 2 pilots maybe or 1 pilot, and you kind of maneuver, and you're responsible for the space that airplane takes up.
Yep.
No 2 pilots in the front of a Chinook can be responsible for the space a Chinook takes up. In the regular Army, I flew around a lot with a flight engineer and a crew chief, and then in combat in the regular Army, they'll have door gunners or OR observers to fill in the other 2 positions. And then in the regiment and the 160th SOAR, you have 4 qualified crew members in the back of that aircraft operating it. So it's not just the pilots going and flying. I mean, you cannot get off the ground without the crew chiefs and the flight engineer. I mean, they maintain the aircraft, make sure it's ready to go, and they also protect you while you're flying. So the one first thing with all of this is there is no flying in Army aviation without the crew guys, period. It just doesn't exist. And anyone else who doesn't value or take seriously the job they do and the amount of hours, blood, sweat, and tears they put in those aircraft, this doesn't need to be involved in it at all,
Yeah, no, that's what I have to realize too, because whenever I think about when I meet people that are C-17 pilots or even C-5 pilots, I'm like, how do the pilots manage all this? They don't do it by themselves. It's a well-oiled machine. It's an incredible mix of human-machine interface and teamwork. Because these are large crews. You could never crew a Chinook with 2 people, like you said. And the flight engineers that I've talked to that work on these Chinooks are incredible. They know the systems of the aircraft, from the weapons, the hydraulics, maybe arguably the avionics, the radios. They know these systems intimately. And I'm sure as you progressed through the big Army, and then the first time you had the opportunity to look at this particular aircraft I'm about to show you, how do you feel when you see this picture? That paint job, that refueling arm, what do you call it? That refueling boom. When you see this picture right here, how does it make you feel? The first time you walk up to an airframe that looks like this.
Oh, dude, I was still the same way, just warm, excited. I miss it. This is the stuff I miss. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I've seen that picture 100 times, because as soon as I dropped my packet for the 160th, I was looking at all these pictures, all of the hype videos. It's such a cool machine.
It is.
And fortunately enough, I got to fly one pretty early in my training pipeline of the 160th, and the first time I took off in one of those things, I was like, this is badass. Just pointing that probe towards the ground and just picking up speed and then popping up. It was amazing. I'd jump right back in if they let me, but I don't think anyone would let me right now. I wouldn't have let me, but
I think you could still fly in the right seat. I think you could probably figure it out, honestly.
I could figure out the right seat. I could fly the right seat. Any of the startup, any of the avionics, I'd probably just sit on my hands so no flight lead would break my fingers or anything, for messing with their stuff. So I just totally sit there and be quiet for once,
Yeah, totally. Real flight leads and pilots are so particular about everything. I mean, and that's true on the civilian side too. Really skilled pilots that fly the big iron, the Gulfstreams and above. They have a lot of say over, what goes in the aircraft. They're responsible for not only this, $50 million machine, but all the lives on board. So I met pilots that would get upset. Some of the MFDs had touchscreen features. Don't you dare touch that screen. I don't want any fingerprints on my MFDs or my PFDs. And so what is that multifunction display? For those that don't know that acronym, it's basically just like the Tesla has that giant screen now. Most modern aircraft have a giant moving map in the middle that you can put various data on, And some of them have touchscreen capabilities now in some of the newer avionics in the civilian side, probably not the military side. But yeah, I met pilots that are like, you better not touch that MFD. Don't you dare use the touchscreen.
Oh, dude, I got a story. And these guys, I won't. These shipmates, we call each other shipmates all the time just to be funny, but you know, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I was on my first deployment with the 160th, and we're going to do a training reset flight, so doing helicopter air-to-air refueling. And again, I'm very helpful. I want to help. I want to jump in. But sometimes I had to learn just to shut up and stay in my lane, to be frank.
Yep.
And I'm sitting in the right seat. I got a new, what they call, so you have the flight lead, then you have what they call as an FMQ, fully mission qualified pilot, who is in charge of the aircraft. So the flight lead in charge of the flight, and then each aircraft outside of the flight lead's aircraft has an FMQ who's in charge, with then myself, which was a BMQ, basic mission qualified pilot. And in the flight lead's cockpit, he flies with the FMQ because he hasn't got time to deal with a scrubby BMQ like myself. But I'm flying, and the FMQ was doing stuff, and I leaned over and I touched his flight computer. And I was like just inputting something, thinking I was being helpful. The instructor pilot, good buddy of mine, and a lot of respect for him. Big dude, looks like a NFL linebacker. He's like 6'3", like 250, like this huge dude sitting in the middle of the jump seat. And he talks to the FMQ. He's like, if someone touched my CDU, I'd break their fingers. And I was like, nope. I'm just gonna sit. So it's another lesson in don't touch their drum set, dude. Like, just don't touch it. Just stay in your lane and super particular. But it's for a reason, right? Because your job when I'm in the right seat is just fly the helicopter. Don't crash. Yep. Put it where it needs to be. The guy in the left seat is trained, way more experienced, and knows what to do with the avionics. If they need your help, they'll tell you.
Totally.
So it was a great lesson in just trusting the person you're flying with and how much it goes into it. And actually, it's something the 160th does, the regular Army doesn't. There's a lot of shared cockpit responsibility in the regular Army, whereas the 160th truly defines in every flight profile who is doing what at what time. So
it's so much to learn. I mean, there's the checklists, the procedures. You guys probably have just hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of reps just practicing this on the ground, practicing it maybe just sitting across from, one of your stick buddies like this and just going through the checklist, going through the procedures. What ifs? What if this system fails? What do you do? I mean, the example I always like to bring up for people that are like not involved in aviation and have never have been is like, they can watch that movie. What's the movie with Tom Hanks where he lands that Boeing aircraft on the Hudson River?
But it's with Sully. It's about Captain Sully.
Captain Sullenberger. Yeah. Everyone knows this. He landed the aircraft on the Hudson River. I'll pull up a picture of it just because it's so ridiculous. A lot of people. Rumor has it he was the last one to leave the aircraft. I believe that part of it.
Oh, 100%.
Rumor has it that he just he put his captain's hat on and just walked out. And he was a military pilot, and so I think he was a Navy pilot or an Air Force pilot.
Definitely fixed wing, like heavy. I think he was, or a fighter pilot, maybe. I don't know.
I think he was a fighter pilot because they show a clip of, of him flying like a Navy jet, as a younger man, and he not only did he follow the checklist, he actually added another step in, and you'll appreciate this. One of the steps he added in, which is I don't think it was on the checklist, or maybe it is now. He turned the APU on. So the APU is a little turbine in the back that provides power generation for the aircraft, usually when it's on the ground. But the APU provides just a little bit of thrust on that aircraft, like just a little bit, because it has pretty hot exhaust gas coming out the back.
Okay.
Both engines died on that Boeing, if I remember correctly. And I think he added his own step where he flipped the APU on. And not only did that provided additional power generation for the aircraft, which is probably a good thing, but it provided just a little bit of thrust, just a little bit.
That's so cool. That is so cool. Yeah. It makes so much sense. I think the one thing military aviators are trained on that is the reps on emergency procedures in the simulator. Like the guys that run the simulator are all legends, right? That flew, and they will. You say, hey, we're gonna fly a mission. Fuck with us. That's what they say. Like, hey, all right, give us the ringer, and they will throw everything at you, have you try to make decisions, and then when it happens for real, you're just action. You know what you're supposed to be doing, and you can coordinate, stay calm, and keep everyone alive.
Totally. Yeah. I think they've run that scenario through like just so many simulators and the what ifs. Here's the picture of it. You see, on the Hudson River.
Yep.
Just truly incredible. This guy's a hero, of course, and the movie's awesome. If you haven't seen it, it just details it. Tom Hanks portrays Captain Sullenberger, and they do little clips of him flying as a Navy pilot. But they've run simulations and they've talked to experts, and they're like, they don't think there's anything he could have done better. Like and that's why these pilots of these large aircraft make big bucks. It's not for when things go right and they're perfect and the weather's nice and you're flying in VFR conditions. It's for when things go bad. That's why the pilot's there. That's why he's in the left seat, is when things like this happen, where you have a double bird strike, both engines are out, and you got to know exactly what to do within seconds. If you make the wrong decision, not only could it be like detrimental, you could have lost out on your glide path a little bit if you didn't.
Any fumbling, any indecision, it's a bad decision, right? It's huge, and that's why the 160th in particular puts so much in their flight leads. Like in the regular everything else, right? The officer, leader, the tactician, right, uses the input of the experts to help make the plan. Like, no, dude, the flight lead's making the plan, and as a AMC, and if you have a good relationship, you can be very involved. But the one thing the regiment does well is it puts the tactical experts in front of the mission. And that's it. And it's excellent, right? Yeah. And those guys that can make this. Nope.
The best guy is leading the way.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. The most proficient, right?
That's it.
Yeah, that's what I've found in smaller, high-performing organizations. Like in the 160th, it's pretty lean. Arguably, for what you guys were able to accomplish in the last 20 years in the GWAT era, you guys are pretty lean. Like there's not that many of y'all. And that's intentional, I think. But yeah, small organizations that have high accountability like that, it's almost always a merit-based system. Like there's no egos involved, or like, hey, we need to get this guy up for this promotion, blah blah blah. It's like no, like you either suck or you don't. It's like there's no ego involved, and it's very hard to fake the funk when you're flying an MH-47 or an MH-60. Like there's no faking that. Mm-mm. And like I don't even know. No. The big Army has gun cameras too for their Apaches, and they review it like game film. Think about if you played any high school sports, wrestling, football. If there was a video camera on you, you can see exactly what you did wrong. And the podcast I mentioned earlier, this guy was reviewing, the battalion commander was reviewing the gun camera for all of the Apache crews and figuring out did they put that Hellfire on target? Did they need to fire that Hellfire? That what is that, $100,000 weapon?
Yeah.
Was it overkill? What was the BDA? What was the risk to the guys on the ground? There's all these what ifs, and so it's aviation is there's not really much room for error or egos. No,
and it's interesting that like anything else in the Army, right? Like leadership positions, there can be posturing. You, and I'm sure you've said it, that there can sometimes, in any bureaucratic organization, right? So I'm not just going to pick on the military at all. It's like there are certain things where you have to put yourself in a position to get certain promotions, to get certain leadership roles, but the equalizer is when you're doing your tactical mission. I'm sure you saw it in the infantry, right? Like, yeah, there may be guys continuing to promote in Army Aviation, but the guys being selected for the hardest missions are the best pilots and the best tacticians, and that's it. And I'm sure it was the same in infantry, right? Like you could have guys in the infantry branch probably that progress, promoted, but who's getting picked for the big show?
Oh yeah, the best.
The best, and that's it.
The best. The direct action force, the guys that get picked for like the GRF mission, or they get picked for like being the attack element on the battalion clearing mission. They put, of course, they want to put their best foot forward. No, it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. It's in aviation is probably just that plus an order of magnitude. It's so cool. And so tell me, you had a great career. What more could you have done in 10 years?
Just about. So full actual time served about 8.5.
8.5.
Very lucky.
Oh my gosh. What more could you have done in an aviation career? I mean, because your glide path was going to be arguably less flying, most likely. Yeah.
That's true.
Okay.
So I was headed for some staff time, headquarters, company command, hopefully in the 160th, and then more staff time, less flying. Another good shot. So all the company commanders in the regiment are majors, 04s. So that would have been a good 2 years of decent flying, being if I was lucky enough to get selected for a line company. And yeah, I mean, the next 10 years looked like 8 moves in 10 years. And that definitely came into, I was very fortunate where I got to, and that kind of came into the start of my decision-making process to exit.
Yeah. Can you tell me about that? How your transition was from active duty MH-47 pilot in I would say the world's most premier aviation unit that has ever been thought of. I mean, the 160th has more assets, has more people, more experience. I mean, everything from Mogadishu to GWAT to every major direct action event that's happened, the 160th is there. So you went from that, high tempo, flying at night, nods on your face permanently at night, and then you're now a civilian, and you're in the greater Nashville area, and you're looking to start a business. Can you tell me a little bit about like that transition and how it was for you?
Oh, absolutely. I was ready to finish up my time. I was ready to go. And I was fortunate enough to work with my command to get a long transition out. And actually, while I was in, I'd moved down to Nashville with my best friend from flight school. We accidentally bought houses that were attached to each other.
Stop.
Totally on accident, dude.
Stop.
100%. 100% accident. We both were like, all right, we want to live in Nashville. We'll commute to work. And now, at that time in 2019 and 2018, 2019, supply was limited. Our budgets were similar. What we were looking for was similar. So it wasn't like lottery odds for us to accidentally buy a house next to each other. But walk into his house and I just put an offer on this house. He said, "You're full of shit. I just got an offer accepted on the house attached to it."
Oh my gosh.
So, 100%. And when we were moving down, we were like, man, dude, we've stayed in Airbnbs in Nashville, like above someone's house, like a mother-in-law suite. And they got like $600 for a weekend. We're like, the house pays for itself if you book 2 or 3 of the weekends. Like, this is great. So, like any good Army officers, we try to overcomplicate a simple situation with our with our houses that are attached to each other. Like, all right, we'll live in each of our houses. We'll take turns renting out our living space, and then we'll rent out the bottom floors, talking to someone much more logical than us. And they go, "Why don't you live in one house and then just rent out the whole other house and make
more
money?"
appealing for the renter, for the short-term renter, yeah.
And logistically just easier, right? Everything about it made more sense than the crazy ideas we were trying to come up with. So we moved down, and the whole point of this whole lead up is that this is our first taste of the vacation rental industry. We put our house up on Airbnb, and it was that first kind of like dopamine hit of, we got to help give someone an excellent experience when they were spending their hard-earned money to come to Nashville, to come vacation. Whether it was a crew, like a bachelor party, or where it was a family going to like a bass competition out to the east. It was just so cool to connect with people and get them on their vacation and get them to see Nashville for what it was, give them recommendations, help them get settled. And now in this time, though, I was in the height of my platoon leader time, so I got to get a taste, help start it up. But really, my business partner, Stephen Brown, put the team on his back, and he kind of ran a lot of the business. So that's kind of where the business started. We created an LLC initially, and then eventually a S corporation to run just that house. We ran it, and then we said, okay, wow, it's pretty profitable. This is great. We had some people that were changing duty stations away from Nashville, and they asked us to manage their house, and Steven started doing that with me whenever I was home from a deployment or a training trip, helping out as much as I could. And then at the end of 2020, we started looking at a franchise called Grand Welcome. And again, I'm still in the Army at this point, and I'll eventually get to your question of the transition. But all this is cooking in the background as I'm in the military still, because my business partner got out before I did. And he starts building up Grand Welcome Nashville. And right around, he gets to about 35 units. In about 6 months, he signs 35 homes. It's incredible.
Wow.
And I'm starting to make my transition out, and that's when I dove in full time, helping him coordinate maintenance on the homes and just kind of a lot of the home operations. You found that, did you? There it is.
Good picture, you guys. I love this picture.
Yeah. It's Steven's crushing the Patagonia vest. He always has good vests. I never could wear a vest. It's something I always envied about him. He's got a good vest.
The vest game is strong, dude. I got a few vests in the closet. Dude. Yeah, I got a few vests in the closet. It's,
you both would like each other. The vest connection would be there for sure. But yeah, I got out and I just dove in with him. I think the biggest transition of what it was like for me, and with all this being said, my original plan out of the Army was to go to law school. I was studying for the LSAT. I told Stevens, like, hey, I'll dive in to help out as long as I can, and then I'm going to be working for the Tennessee Attorney General, and then I'm going to law school. That's what I wanted to do. And the transition was interesting. I think the biggest part for me is realizing people's stress thresholds. Like, yes, we had guests. Yes, there's people's money. There's a lot of serious things going on, but no one was dying. We weren't saving lives. And as we hired employees and built the business, realizing that when there'd be an issue, and Steve and I would say, well, no one's dying, so we'll be all right, is that's not the normal. That's not people's normal stress tolerance and stress threshold. So I had a hard time navigating other people's stresses and emotions on things that I did not feel stress around. And that was tough for me. And I also had trouble navigating how to assert myself in a civilian setting, almost to a fault where I was too passive. And I think that made that transition, and I'm still working on it, today. But eventually the business built, and we acquired some other territories. And around April 2022, I gave Steven a call, and I said, dude, I'm going all in on the business. Like, we're just going to send it. And here we are, multiple territories now, and I get to build and run a business with my best friend and a lot of my good Army buddies still that it got involved in, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So
amazing. Oh my gosh. I love that story. And it's so obvious to me that you have the skill set to run a business, and it resonates with me. I try to, overcorrect, leaving like as an infantry officer, this is what we're doing. It's just, you got to be decisive, and trying to, I guess I overcorrected. I became, more passive, and I was like, oh, I got to, try to flush this out of my personalities. And I started doing that like 6 months before I got out of the military. And so, obviously the guys liked my chill attitude when we're still in uniform. But I've struggled to find that balance, because like I don't want to be, you have to, if you're a leader in the civilian world, it's much different than the Army. It's, everyone has different stress thresholds, and they got different stuff going on. It's not core to their identity. Their job's not their identity in most cases, like it was when you were an MH-47 pilot. That's another thing I struggle with. Like, being an infantry officer was core to my identity, and it was hard to decouple from that for me personally.
Oh, the same. I mean, I still do this to my daughter. I go, stop. Give me your eyeballs. And like, my wife's sitting there, who's also a military, Army veteran, much better officer than I ever was. She was a rock star. Cool. I'll brag on her later, but she'd be like, your daughter's not in the military. Stop. Yep. Stop directing her to give you her eyeballs. Like, what are you doing in that job?
You're scaring her.
Like, stop it. Although now she's used to it. So I go, Lana, give me your eyeballs. She's like, yeah, she's in it. But it was tough, and like, I had trouble correcting people, and I had trouble as a leader knowing when it was time. In the Army, you don't fire people, right? Like, you don't fire unless they are not making Army standards or doing illegal stuff, it's hard to get someone out of a job position. And it's all about what can you do as a leader to, it's almost the onus, and this is I know a stress from friends talking as officers, it's like you're blamed for individual refusal to work.
Yep, you are.
Right?
Yeah, it's your fault as their leader. You're not.
Yeah. They
You're
got a
the reason.
DUI. What did you do that caused them? Why couldn't you prevent that? Right? But
Totally.
now in a combat situation, like I understand why the military system is set up the way it is, right? That's a result of it, and I totally get it. So I don't want to harp too hard, but it was hard for Steven and I to be, and this is one of the best piece of advice we got: be slow to hire and quick to fire.
Yeah.
Right, and we were very slow to fire in the early years. It was just so hard to, because there's always context, right? There's always a story. There's always a reason, but does the person live the values that you set forward in your organization? Are they doing what they say they're going to do? And is there incremental improvement that is at a pace that the business can handle? And that's such a hard thing because like I had a lot of emotional attachment to my guys. I've helped guys
100%.
that were failing height and weight and not passing PT tests to get them up to maxing. Like it was, I like to pour my heart and soul into the people I'm leading, but in running a business is like this hard balance that I don't know if I'll ever get right of what do we got to do. And it's, for me, it's like you're making a business decision versus personal. There's people that we have let go that I have no issue with as a person. No issue, but it was not the right person for the business at the right time. So that's something I definitely struggle with. I've now gotten better. And you ever talk to Steven, I'll let him say yes or no. But I think I've gotten better where if someone is messing up, it's similar in the Army though, right? If you overassert yourself, over yell, overhype everything, you're going to lose your team. So now I try to very selectively assert with my team members, my direct reports, hey, don't ever do that again. In the Army, I probably would have riddled that with a bunch of curse words, maybe closer proximity of communicating. But it's what I've realized, it's the same with just different words. Yep. And different ways of expressing it. The leadership principles remain the same. It's just how you translate that skill set into a way that works into the system that you're working in. And job to job, business to business, working in the dynamics in Amazon, I'm sure 100% difference than how I run my business versus the businesses you've been in, right? The culture and everything. I think it's adapting the skills and techniques to the particular culture that you're working in and existing and leading in.
Yeah, I agree. One really cool podcast that you shared with me is with one of the executives at Stripe, which is a payment company that you might not, some people might not be familiar with them, but a lot of websites, if you go to buy something or pay for a service, a lot of the payment interface that you deal with is through Stripe, which is a super successful unicorn company that two brothers founded. And I think they hired Claire Hughes Johnson to help them run the business.
Absolutely.
And you sent that to me, and the timing was perfect because I really needed to hear that. But essentially, she said the same thing, that like, if you find someone that's like you hired and you're just not a good fit, not working out, you do have to be quick to fire them because they're going to have a detrimental effect on the organization. And honestly, I've seen this happen. They're going to have a detrimental effect on your top performers. And one of the things I loved and the wisdom that she shared was that, instead of, focusing your time on the low performers, and you should be, helping them find another opportunity, she said double down and focus on your top performers. Like spend time with them, make sure they're not getting burned out, make sure they're getting rewarded, recognized. And I found that like super insightful. That's not something that was intuitive to me because you spend so much time, trying to rehab and, bring the low performers in the military up to the standard and catch up with everybody else. When really, arguably in the corporate world, like you should double down on your high performers. If you're running an organization, like you should reward them, give them, unlimited runway to succeed and grow as a person, because like those are the people that really are invested in the business,
Oh, 100%. And it was not intuitive for me, right? I would never been able to put that into words. And like after I realized that if some of my top performers call me any time of day,
Yep,
I'll pick up the call.
100%.
Because I know if they're calling me, it is something that they have dove in, tried to solve, and they
Hmm.
need assistance in something they cannot get anywhere else except from myself. So it was so critical that that whole podcast and then her book, Scaling People. It was just amazing. I did something. I call it corny. I know we talked about it, but I felt so compelled, and this after hearing that, I reached out to her and said, thank you for sharing that wisdom outside of a book. Because typically people don't share that much of a book they've written
Nope.
in a podcast for free. And she just literally took a lot of the core points and put it out there on display. And it was incredible. And like her four principles are, you know, you want to build self-awareness to then build mutual awareness around the team. Say the thing you think you cannot say, right? Like that's just so huge in organizations. Understanding management versus leadership, and then always reverting back to your operating system, right? Back to the SOP in the Army. Like that is the basis of you building things. And I reached out to her on LinkedIn, and she was very gracious, responded and said, hey, thanks. Like, you know, I appreciate it. And it was awesome. So
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed it. I had to listen to it in two different sessions because it's just a lot to digest. I found myself
yeah,
rewinding parts of it because like, oh man, I need to hear that again. I should have taken notes on it, but yeah, I'm so glad you shared that with me. And Stripe is a pretty crazy example of what a small business can turn into, man. I'd say
yeah.
PayPal, Stripe, all those financial companies that act as like the consumer interface for goods and services is like, wow, Stripe is quite the success story.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's just cool to see how her leadership style developed because she started at Google when Google only had around 2,500, 3,000 employees. And when she left, they were at like 60,000. So just the amount of mistakes and how open she was about that of learning and adjusting her management style, leadership style. One of my favorite analogies, and people in sales can fall victim to this, is when she talked about the raincoat is at school, where lack of accountability, lack of personal responsibility, and holding people accountable to say, no, you left the raincoat at school, which I deal with my 9-year-old. I'm sure you with your kids as well. Where's your, where's your coat? Oh, it's at school. It's like, no, no, no. You left it at school. So I don't know. I think accountability was a huge thing I took from it, which is to circle all the way back. And I apologize for the bouncing around, but
No,
the
great.
how to hold people accountable was my biggest struggle. And in my position, I don't like the title because we're a small business. We have like 20 employees, but as a COO, my job is the day-to-day accountability and operation of the business and how it works cross country. And I was struggling holding people accountable. And it took a lot of coaching from my business partner, Steven, and just trying to find resources of how can I sit someone and get them to do what I want. And in Claire's podcast, when she talks about the manager, I'm waiting on so-and-so. Like, why are you always waiting on them? Why can't you deliver the results from your people, right? And it helped solidify and put names and words to the struggles I was having as a manager and as a leader in an organization. So
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, every problem in an organization is a people problem. It's like
yeah,
I follow this other business leader too, and she says something along the lines of like, your first step is like, figuring out that there's a problem. Okay, that's step one is like identifying. Okay, this is a problem, and
yeah,
then like the next level up is like, how can I solve this problem? And then the next step up, at the COO level, when you're trying to design this machine that people can run, is it's not how can you fix the problem, like who do I need to put in place to fix this problem for me? How do I hire someone smarter than me in this specific job function to solve this problem for the organization, and then get out of their way? I give them the tools they need to be successful, and that's where I want to eventually be in life, is be in a position where I can give other people the opportunity to do like the best work of their entire career, and be like, no, like I hired you because you are much better at this than me, and I'm going to listen to what you want to say. I think Steve Jobs said something along the lines too. He's like, you hire talented people to tell you what to do, not to tell them what to do. It's kind of, I mean, he was pretty successful too. So.
Yeah, he did okay for himself. No, it's true. Yeah, it's true. So. I mean, Steven harps on me on all the time. Is like, stop solving people's problems. Give them the directions, say, figure it out, and give me your solutions. Because, again, I love coaching people. I love helping. The thing that I love so much about what we're doing right now is I love watching someone and getting them to where they want to go. Yeah. Like, it's just awesome. Like, seeing their success and what they want, achieving the goal they wanted to achieve, getting a result for the business that they wanted to get. And yeah, it's a struggle to just, all right, go figure it out and let me know when you have a solution. Or by this time, like, tell me what your plan is, and we'll go from there. So yeah.
They'd probably feel more invested, and not to go down to Steve Jobs' rabbit hole, but like, he always harped on the quality of the work. Like, you're not attacking the person when you're giving constructive feedback. You're holding their work to a higher standard. Like, you're not attacking them personally. It's not personal. Like, it's all about the work, the output. And so one thing I wanted to ask you about, since you're a business leader in your community and you run this geographically dispersed team, when you're giving constructive feedback with your team, whether it be in your current role or in a previous role or in the Army, have you noticed that, people that are unwilling to accept that type of feedback are typically they're harder to coach, and they're harder to keep accountable than the high performers that I've worked with. When you give them constructive feedback, that's what they want. That's why they're there. Like, they want to get better. Have you encountered that in your career where, typically, one person you might give some constructive feedback and they might give an excuse, or they might be like, oh no, that's not true, or they try to lash out, whereas the high performer will be like thank you for the feedback, and then they show up the next day, and it's like you can already tell like they're on a path to growth.
Oh, 100%. I tell you, one of my direct reports, one of the people I work with closely every day, she always tells me, like, tell me what I'm doing wrong, right? First thing, what am I doing wrong? I need to hear it. Like, what am I doing? And then a lot of the time, because she is such a high performer, she's doing what she needs to do, right? So it is a challenge that, how do I continue to give her feedback? But you're right. High performer, anytime I've come to her with a criticism, hey, don't ever do this. You need to fix this, and you need to tell me how you're going to do it in like a day, right? She dives in, wants to learn, picks it all apart, so hungry and curious. We've had an employee that this is actually an interesting, high performer, proven success, but wasn't there for the team or like the culture, wasn't behind the vision of what we were trying to do. And my business partner would tell you is I try to get along with everyone, and that's not going to happen. People are not going to like me. I totally get it. I also, though, if I do anything that wrongs someone or hurts someone, I always try to reconcile and say, hey, what did I do? I want to make sure I'm not doing anything unbeknownst to me that's, derogatory, hurtful, or any kind of poor leadership habit. But I was trying to take that success and proven track record, and it's like, hey, we're trying to build a system. We're trying to build a scalable system, not just one business unit, but multiple, and be able to take this system and copy and paste it with the same feel, the same culture. So I'm really looking for help. So for example, CRM as a sales guy, right? You got your CRM, you got sequences. So you got a person you're going to start contacting, automatically creates all your tasks in a time order. Like day 1, you call. Day 3, you're going to send a text. Day 4, you're sending an email, all this thing. And I was like, all right, hey, look, you have a good sequence. You have a proven record of sales. Let's build the sequence in our CRM so that any salesperson we bring into this company can fall into our proven process. One thing I've noticed with them is it was kickback. I've never used sequences. And I was like, okay.
They work.
I was like, that's awesome. And proven success. And I'm not going into details, but like truly proven success. So this is not someone that wasn't proven, that was just all bark, no bite, like success in the industry. But I think there's three categories: an underperformer that's not self-aware. So that's where you get the defensive. Oh, well, so-and-so didn't get me X. I couldn't do Y because you gave me all this other stuff. I had competing priorities, but they didn't negotiate prior to the deadline. Right? Deadline has come and now they're caught with their pants down, and it's like, all right, what happened? High performers, like you talked about, they take the feedback and they run. And then you have like someone who's a high performer but not a fit for your organization.
Yeah.
Not behind the values, not behind the vision. And I think that's like that third piece. It is, right? Because I wanted to do that job. I wanted that person to be so good at it because that would enable me to step back and focus more cross-functionally, but it didn't work out. Was not behind what we were trying to do. And that was a good example of where we were quick to fire, and business partners supported me in it, and wish it worked out, but it didn't, because it just, things like, I've never used sequences. I don't see the point. Like, it's just not willing to change, mold, and adapt, or take all that good skill and apply it to what we were trying to do.
Yeah, no, that resonates. I know you're like this too, as I know you, but I'm always trying to take like the best in class techniques in not only my industry, but like every other industry, because certain industries are way better at stuff. And I've had the great fortune like of working in a multitude of different industries, and I try to handpick like what works the best and apply it to every single role, and then learn along the way. I can learn something from anyone. I mean, I'm always learning stuff from people and trying to see stuff from their perspective, because it just makes you a better communicator. It makes you a better person, because you can be more empathetic. Makes you a better leader to be able to understand like where they're coming from, because these are human beings, and everyone's got a unique perspective as they walk on this planet. So
yeah, you brought up a good point of always learning, and it's something Steven and I say all the time, is like, we are always learning, but don't confuse that with confidence in what we do know and what we're trying to execute, right? Yep, totally. It's the humility to always be learning, but also the confidence that we know what we know what we don't know, and we are always looking for something new. And I think this person it was a challenge. It was actually one of my hardest leadership challenges that I don't know if I failed, but there was it wasn't a good resolution. And it's always being hungry, right? Always being hungry to get better and know more. And the industry we're in now, there is a lot of stagnation. It's just, there's stuff that has worked for 20, 30 years that people continue to do. And now as the market and everything's adjusting, you got to figure it out. You got to find that new thing. And the one thing I will say confidently is that I think you'll not find many other people that outwork Steven and I, and trying to figure out the best way to provide the best service for our guests, for our owners. And I think we're just really excited to learn, because it's always changing. There's always some new tech, some new sub-sale, some new ancillary service that you can attach onto your guest experience. So when you said always learning, it just kind of struck me. I know that's why we're the same. We're always like passing each other recommendations back and forth, but I think that's what you have to do in anything. Like, the people that are the hungriest to learn or to be proven wrong are the ones that are going to be most successful. Like, come prove me wrong. Like, I want to know, like, how can I make this better?
Oh, yeah. Know? Yeah. And I'll change my opinion with new information. I will.
100%.
Yeah. If I hear some compelling new information or new technique, I'll be like, okay, like, I now have new information. I'm going to behave differently, and I'm going to approach this problem from a totally different direction and take this on a different azimuth than I would have otherwise. I always like to reserve the end of the interviews to give you an opportunity to talk about really whatever topics you feel strong about, or ask me something that you're curious about. I definitely want to make these, as back and forth and conversational as possible. But you're a curious person. But yeah, I want to open up the floor to you. So. Oh,
I appreciate it. It's been burning for me for a minute, and I saw you start out the podcast. I mean, we talked back in, was it 2022? Mm-hmm. Was 2022? And you were already, like, some of the ideation of this was kind of floating around. But what led you from the job you were doing when we were talking about, the sales and the role you were having to your interest in the podcast. Like what was that like that sparks like I'm doing this? Because you went from I was thinking about it to now we're on number 19, is it right?
Yeah.
And this getting better, and I've seen you dive into it. It's just been really impressive to watch. I'm just kind of curious about your journey because we haven't really talked about it. I mean, we've been catching up a lot, but what's that journey been like, and like what started it, and just I would love to hear more about it.
Yeah, I got my first camcorder when I was probably, I don't know, 10 years old or so, and would film little videos like with like me and my brother. Like I'd film him like jumping off the balcony and stuff, and doing all these like dumb skateboard stunts. And the video editing was very difficult because it was all on like those little miniature tapes and stuff.
Yep.
So very, very challenging. And then I always took a ton of photos too. I've always rolled around with a camera. Like I've hundreds of videos and photos from Afghanistan, from my time in the Army, from my time at college. I've just always enjoyed capturing moments and hearing people's perspective. And then I finally decided, I was invited on my buddy's podcast, Josh McMillian. He's an Army officer. He's still active duty. And so I was a guest, about a year and a half ago on his podcast. 'Cause I thought it would be kind of cool. He invited me in, which was neat. And he kind of showed me how he did it. He showed me how he produced it. And I was like, this is like really cool. Like this aligns well with, my fascination of, well, first making videos and then exploring like really unique people, people that flew MH-47s, people that, were, in MARSOC units. I've interviewed some really fascinating people, and that obviously appeals to me. I love talking to people. And so at first it just started out with like me and a few friends, like a few Army buddies were just like BSing on camera with this cheap Logitech webcam and this cheap microphone that I'm talking into. And then like I started posting the videos, and like some of them were getting like thousands of views. And I was like, and then I started, my initial intent was to do like 21 episodes. I heard like it's very difficult to do 21 long form episodes. And like the first 10 were like brutal. Like I struggled through it. I'm like, there's no way I'm getting to 21. And here I am. I got 2 more to go, and I got 2 scheduled after this too. It's like I got 2 in the book already. So like I've enjoyed it more and more. And then the machine gets oiled, just like your business. You get better at it. You learn how to do it better, and then it became kind of addicting to like, okay, how can I tweak in the audio? How can I use software to dial in the audio so it's a better listening experience, and like the person listening on their AirPods like feels like they're in the room with us. Like there's ways to do that. It's been a really cool way to learn how to produce and post multimedia. I don't dive into the analytics a ton, but like anytime I think about giving up and just being like, this is kind of a dumb hobby, it's super time consuming. Like I have people, message me like, wow, like thank you for doing this. Like I'm listening to every episode. And I've noticed too, like I don't track the analytics really, but I've noticed that like when people listen to one, like they listen to a lot of them. And I've had a lot of people reach out and be like I really like what you're putting out there. I'm like, oh, like I didn't think anybody was listening. Like I'm just having fun. So yeah, the initial intent was just fun. And then I've had so many people reach out and be like, man, I really like what you're doing. I'm like, okay, like that gives me like another, anytime someone reaches out and says that, it gives me like another 90 days of runway to keep doing it.
No, that's awesome. What was the turning point? Like from the grind, the sludge of like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, to you're like, no, this is it. 'Cause you could see the love and the passion and asking the questions, being in the conversation. Like you just love doing it. So like, what was that turning point? I'm always curious about like when it goes from the grind to, wow, this is it.
Yeah, I'd say probably a couple episodes ago, like the last interview that I filmed, I'm holding off to post it. It's going to be really kind of a crazy interview. It's a really good interview. Yeah. So I think that was the turning point where I was like, well, first of all, the person that I interviewed was like, I really like what you've been doing. It made a huge impact on me. I'm like, oh, why don't you come on? Like you're also a pretty public face. You're a communicator. He's on TV and stuff. This guy's such a good communicator. You're gonna love the interview.
Oh,
he's so polished. Yeah, he's like so good.
Yeah.
So I was like, why don't you come on? He's like, actually, like I've been thinking about doing my own media thing. So he's like, yeah. He's like, this is like a godsend. Like I'm gonna do this with you. The timing just worked out perfectly. It was an awesome interview, but it was like really deep and powerful. And although he wasn't in the military like we were, the struggles were the same. like the struggles that he faced in your 20s when you're trying to figure out your life as a man in this world, and like you don't really have much to offer. The struggles are like they're human struggles.
Yeah.
And then the struggle, and then the rising from the ashes, like the phoenix rising from the ashes, and overcoming those challenges, taking failure out of your vocabulary to where you're like, no, failure's not in my vocabulary anymore. Yeah, I fell down, but I get right back up. And now the iterations are just quicker. I don't stay like discouraged, for more than a day or so. And that's how I feel, and that's how he feels. And so it was so powerful, the interview that I did with him. I'm like, oh, I can't stop doing this. And then all the little encouragement along the way from like you and my friends and strangers that have reached out and be like, this is really crazy what you're doing.
That's so
I
cool.
really like what you're doing, because there's no agenda. Like, what people like about it is just like open source information. The real stories, the real people. There's no corporate backing. There's no monetary incentive. I don't do any monetization. I don't do any advertisements. I'm not pitching a supplement or like I don't know what do people pitch? Athletic greens,
Yeah, or Four Sigmatics.
Yeah, mushroom coffee. Like I'm not pitching anything, and so I think people just like they just view it as like authentic, because I mean it really is. It's just like it's two friends catching up after 12 years, different Army journeys, different business journeys. So I don't know. I think the world needs more of that, and I think we're heading in a direction where everyone will be able to do this. Well, they already can. You're already able to do it in the United States, which is unique to the world. But yeah, that's the long and short of it, I guess. Is just, I really enjoy it. That's the primary objective. And then, the people that I've reached, that people can watch this day or night, the people that I've reached is just a bonus. I mean, it's a huge bonus, but yeah.
Doing what you love, I think, is the key. It's like you can tell, and it's something I've figured out with like business, is like you can do something for a paycheck. Even hiring people, right? People talking about raises, like you can give someone a raise, but if they don't love what they're doing, that raise will burn out and they'll stop. So I'm so glad you're doing it, man, because it's like hopefully be back on, be able to catch up more, do this more with you, because it just seems like you're loving it, and I just love to do things with people that are loving what they're doing. It's just it's inspiring to just kind of lean into the hobbies that you're doing and just do them for the hobby. Like there's no goal. It's like that values-based living that we're like, it's like, what is that direction you want to walk in your life? And you've always loved connecting with people, and I've always appreciated that, because you've always been genuinely interested in what I've done. I got a little story about, I was telling earlier, I was a freshman in engineering, head down, studying day and night, and I remember a distinct time, we'll leave details out for any viewers, but the bottom line is I was studying in my room, and I was in the room next to you, and you kicked down my door and you said, dude, it's 10 o'clock on a Friday, what are you doing? I said, I'm studying. I got to study for this test. He's like, what groundbreaking thing is going to occur for you in the next 3 hours that you can't come hang out with me on this Friday night? And I said, Jerry, you're right. Like, what am I doing? Like, what's the diminishing return I'm getting by grinding myself into the ground on a Friday evening, besides catching up? And I just deep conversations over some good pizza and, some red stripe. And I just think that I got so much more out of that. And my performance was probably that much better because I had someone there as a leader to come pull me out of my own head. And I always appreciated that about you, man. So just want to say thanks.
Words, man. That means a lot coming from you. Feel free to stay on, and then we'll save the recording. So let me hit the end recording thing.